Greetings, GPH 113. This is your friendly instructor, Dr. Mike. I'm coming to you with just a short introductory video, not to this particular article, but to reading research articles. We're going to read quite a few during this semester. You'll also be doing a lot of reading of research articles as you plan your honors project, and so I thought that it would be nice for me to go through some of the individual sections of a research article. Nearly every article begins with a title, a list of authors, and an abstract. And typically, if an article appears behind a paywall on a website, in essence, you have to pay for it if you want to read it. Or, even better, your library at the school you go to pays for it before you can read it. This is typically the part of the article that's given to you for free, so that you can determine if you actually do want to pay for it, or you do want to download it in order to read it. And in this article, we have our title here, followed by our list of authors, followed by our abstract. Abstracts are short paragraphs that describe the context of the study, the research question, the primary findings, and the methods that the researchers used in very simplistic, direct, short sentences. Most journals will limit the length of an abstract to about 150 to 300 words. So this paragraph has to be on point the whole way through. And the reason why you want to start by reading an abstract is that this paragraph, as concise as it is and short and direct as it is, will be the paragraph that tells you whether the rest of the article is worth your time or not. So if you're doing a research project associated with, I don't know, let's use our example that we had in lab for that first week. What effect does cloud cover have on plant growth? You want to look for that relationship somewhere in the abstract. What kind of things about clouds are mentioned? What kind of things about plant growth are mentioned? And if the abstract doesn't mention either of those, you can probably skip that article and move on to something else, so that you're not wasting your time reading a bunch of pages that ultimately you can't use. The next section of a research article is the introduction, and the introduction is going to stimulate interest in reading the rest of the article, as a good introduction does for all types of writing. And the research introduction is also going to give you a sense as to how this article fits within the broader research on the topic. Now, sometimes the literature review, a review of what has already happened in research, and a review of the related material, the theoretical constructs behind what it is that we're studying, sometimes that's a separate section. But many journals actually combine the introduction and the literature review, and sometimes a theoretical context, into one section. Literature reviews always begin very broadly to stimulate that interest and tell you something that is big picture, and then start to narrow that down to get to a very specific research question and or objective and or hypothesis. Sometimes only one of those is given. Sometimes all three of them are given. So you'll begin wide, big picture stuff, and then you narrow down, and by the time you reach the next section, you should have a clear understanding as to what the authors are hoping to gain through the study. What was their question? If we look at this particular article, we're going to start right away and see that the very first sentence is that big picture interest thing. Biological dependence on the 6 major nutrient elements: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, and phosphorus, is complemented by a selected array of other elements, usually metals or metalloids present in trace quantities, that serve critical cellular functions such as enzyme cofactors. Now, there's a lot in that sentence, but that sentence is telling us an awful lot of information that's already widely accepted by the scientific community, and also leads us into the central provocative point of this article. And we can see what that central provocative point is by going back to the title: a bacterium that can grow by using arsenic instead of phosphorus. When we look at that very first sentence, we don't see arsenic, only phosphorus. So right away, we're setting up the context in which this article is going to challenge understood scientific information. Another key to identify pieces of an article as being part of one section or another is to take a look at how the words are written. Most of the time, authors will write the introduction in the present tense. So let's take a look. A few examples include: In these examples and others, the trace elements that share chemicals. Here we present evidence. Those are all present tense verbs. Now, the next section that we want to look at is the methods section. And the methods section is going to tell us how the authors answered their question. Methods typically will come after the introduction, but before the results. But in some journals, methods come all the way at the end. And if I'm not incorrect, I believe this is an example of one such article. Yeah. So this is actually an example of an article where the methods are available online if you want to read detailed information about what they did. And sometimes those big picture, big name articles like Nature, like Science, this is from the journal Science, they will do that. Nature puts methods at the end, Science puts them online. But many, many, many other journals will put them right after the introduction. And methods is a section that reads in the past tense. It tells you what was done. And the way you're going to distinguish methods from results, which is also in the past tense, is to take a look at what the sentences are doing. Are the sentences telling you a list of things that the researchers did, a list of choices that they were making, a list of reasoning as to why they did this versus that? If that's the case, you're looking at methods. If instead the sentence, written again in the past tense, is telling you what the researchers found, what they observed, what the study gave them, what they concluded, those are results. And results are often accompanied by tables, pictures, graphs, and charts with more detailed information. So here we can see that the results, we go right from the introduction directly to the results, are given subheadings, geomicrobiology of GFAJ-1, right, along with some accompanying photographs. Next section of those results, cellular stoichiometry and elemental distribution, right? So here we have additional results. Now, the authors were clever in this particular article in that the structure of the journal says you don't put methods into the actual article. Those are available online. But a savvy researcher, given that context, is still going to incorporate methods for the reader to be able to understand at the moment they're reading what was done. So let's just look at that very quickly. To determine whether GFAJ-1 was taking up arsenate from the medium, we measured intracellular arsenic content by means of inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry, right? So that first sentence, that's not technically a result. That's a method. They're telling you what they did. Why? So that you can understand what next comes. Finally, research articles will end with some concluding comments. And those concluding comments sometimes appear in a section called conclusion, sometimes they appear in a section called discussion, or sometimes they appear in a section that's labeled discussion and conclusion. And it really depends upon the journal what you're going to get or end up with. So here we look at this very last couple of paragraphs. Our data show arsenic-dependent growth by GFAJ-1. Growth was accompanied by arsenate uptake and assimilation, blah, 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 right? And then the final paragraph, we report the discovery of an unusual microbe, blah, 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 right? So here what they're doing is they're concluding the article by telling you what the key points, what the absolute takeaways are going to be, and also why this is important. If an author cannot identify why their study is important, well, it's probably not going to make it very far in the scientific community. So when we think about how we structure a scientific article, we begin very broad. Then we narrow down into a research objective / question / hypothesis, followed by, in most cases, an account of what we did, our methods, followed by what we learned, our results, with charts, tables, pictures, graphs, etc., followed by a discussion, what does it mean, with or without, depending upon the journal, a conclusion, why does this matter? And all of those pieces can be found very concisely in our abstract. When you read the articles for this class, an additional point of note that I want you to take away is that I anticipate You don't understand all of the detailed science that goes into these articles. In many cases, I don't understand all of the detailed science that goes into the articles. It is only through years of training and extra classes far beyond what you have already taken that I have learned how to pick out key points and interpret what the author is probably trying to say. I'm not a microbiologist, so when I read this article, I would say a good 70% of it went right over my head. But I'm a trained scientist, so I'm able to pick out these individual sections, identify the writing style, and use the abstract and concluding comments to help me determine what is the author trying to tell me? Why is this research important? And what does it do for science? And that's what I want the rest of you to do as well. Rely heavily on the abstract and the conclusion. If you don't understand the methods and the results, that's okay. Maybe write down what you don't understand and then bring that up in our discussion boards. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the semester. Dr. Mike out.